This is the meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. Let's go around the table. Darren Sayers for the record. We'll start with you.
Lance Wilbur, Office of Management and Budget.
Susanna France.
John Weddleton.
Felix Rivera.
Jim Steele.
Dick Graney.
Forrest Dunbar.
Eric Cross.
Christopher Lunston.
Peterson.
Scott Lee in front audit. Mike Chadwick in front audit.
And the audience?
And the audience.
The gentleman in red. We don't know who you are. What's your role in the city these days? We'd like to know.
Same role, but finishing up a lot of the stuff that I was working on before.
So we can blame you for the problems that are still happening?
That always happens, whether I was here or not.
It's good to see you again, Alden. So Robert Harris is not here. Is that correct, Lance?
I know that he's in the building, but I don't know where he is.
We'll get back if he gets here. Lance, we're down to item 4 on the agenda. Update of 2017-2018 budget, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't take much time on 2017. In working through our SAP as we're documenting, because all of our documentation from PeopleSoft to SAP, we still have not closed the month of October and the month of November, which gives me a little bit of challenge to give us a year-end projection for 17. But I don't have any immediate need for cause or concern. There are 3 departments, well, actually 1 department I think that actually will be running hot, and that will be payroll. I expect they've been spending a lot of time on that, so I do expect them inside the finance department to be over, and I don't know how much, but they are 1 department within the entire finance, so as that becomes available. As you recall, we asked all departments to save 0.5%. Police and fire will likely not make the 0.5%, but they are both on target to make budget, so we will not need any additional resources from them to make their budget in 17. So that's what I see right now in 2017. We typically give you a monthly report for the month of October, and again, until it closes, I won't be able to provide that to you. Our last report to the Assembly, not last meeting, but one before that, was for the end of the 3rd quarter. So if the information's available, we'll report to you on 17. As we go into January, we'll know a lot better on how 17 ends, and then the allocation of fund balance as we move forward, and we'll know what that amount will be as well. 2018, since you've approved the operating and capital budgets, we have loaded all of the 2018 operating budget into SAP. Departments are available to check the load inside SAP, and then they are actually working to set up their encumbrances so they can actually take action as soon as January rolls around, which is very good. On the capital side, all of the capital programs in which you appropriated money, which basically means the utilities, we've allowed them, and all of their capital budgets and their appropriations are loaded. The exception would be obviously the general government capital budget, because until the bonds pass, we won't be appropriating any of those funds. And so for 2018, we are ready to go on the operating side on January 1st, and then on the capital side, all the utilities are ready to go. And then with the bonds, assuming those all pass, we'll pull the trigger on those. I will say that sort of related to 17 and 18, the workflow in SAP as it relates to transfer of funds, additional supplemental funds, budget transfers within departments, that system is working. We turned it on about 2 weeks ago. We've got some initial training, and department heads, so it's very brand new to them. But honestly, Mr. Chairman, what used to take potentially weeks to get a budget transfer, we can do in a day or a matter of hours. Rose can implement something. We can get the chair or somebody to approve that. Our analysts do it, and I do it, and it's done. And if it's just moving pencils to paper, we don't even get involved anymore. They just do it themselves. If they're moving between labor and non-labor, then we do get involved. But the process is being very expedited in that process right now. So
We have a few questions for you, sir.
thank you, Mr.
Mr. Steele.
In terms of the payroll, are there any employees who is waiting for money, that has been waiting for money for more than a pay period? Or that's overpaid that has to get back to us? I'm just trying to figure out where we stand with those individuals, their impact to them.
So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Steele, I'm gonna let Mr. Harris address that.
He's
kind of
waving at me,
point
so-
guy on
Yeah.
payroll.
Okay, Mr. Harris?
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, Mr. Steele. So, thank you. My apologies for being late. I figured I'd let the room clear out from the last meeting, and that happened faster than I thought it was going to. But to answer your question about payroll, yes, there are still a fair number of people who have submitted pay corrections, some of which presumably, in fact, probably argue almost all, believe they are owed some additional money or a correction of leave or this or that. So we are in the process of working through the pay corrections, as well as trying to fix the system, as well as continuing to do normal payroll. The question, though, as we've done the prioritization, has been to say that for folks who didn't get a paycheck, or where there's some dollar threshold where it's they need an off-cycle check that day, we've been handling those. So typically, where we have pay corrections, that would, probably the vast majority sort of fall into this category of they had a half hour where they were supposed to be paid time and a half versus a half hour of regular time, where they got paid a half hour of double time when it should have been, a different category of time. In some measure, the first driver for that is that SAP is based on schedules. So if the work schedule that is in the system for the employee isn't correct, or isn't what they're working, then from there it all starts to cascade downhill. So we're taking steps to address the question of making sure that every employee knows what their work schedule is and that they're working to their work schedule. And if they're not, then they change their schedule, because that's the first line of defense. So if somebody's supposed to come in at 7:30, but they came in at 7, or they were supposed to take lunch at 11:30, but took it at 12, and their supervisor said, yeah, that's okay. In the old system with PeopleSoft, we could massage that. With SAP, we have to go and fix that schedule they're working for. So one of the things we've been messaging to people and need to get more word out is that for the directors, have your people work their schedule, or if that doesn't work, change the schedule. That'll help take care of a whole bunch of the kinds of pay correction problems we're seeing.
Mr. Steele?
Yeah, I'm just worried about that person out there that is extremely frustrated by over a couple of pay periods the fix hasn't happened.
Sure.
And so
And
we
I'd be
continue to
happy-
have that problem.
I'd be happy to. I know last time we had this discussion, I sort of jumped right ahead and ran through the SAP update ahead of the agenda. So I don't want to do that this time.
No.
I would be happy to talk about SAP progress when we get to item number 6.
All right.
But
I just wanted to
Yeah.
lay it out there on the table.
and since I'm a little late, I will just, if I might, Mr. Chairman, just
Go ahead,
on
sir.
this item number 3, MOA financial status. It touches a little bit on SAP. We are still working to do the October month-end close. Typically, the October month-end close would happen about the second week of the following month, so November. We're hoping that we'll be able to get it done in early January. And as Lance has probably mentioned, that the good news is, for a variety of reasons, we're not spending as much money as we might otherwise, I think. I'm guessing, I'm hoping, because I don't have the sort of financial reporting systems that would tell me, in fact, we're on budget, we're under budget. I do know that there are a fair number of people who are reporting problems with the purchasing system, which leads me to believe they're probably under budget because they're not able to successfully manage transactions.
Good cost reduction, can't buy it.
So it's a bit of a stretch, but that's some good news. And otherwise, I can say that the health of the municipality is, we're in good shape. I'm as we get to the progress report, I'll talk about what the outlook might be for SAP.
Okay. I've got 4 other people. John, you're next.
John?
John, you're next, sir.
We lost a lawsuit, the fire department did. Where's that money come from? And
I
when?
don't know that we have lost any lawsuits.
I thought there was that
We settled.
employee one, or
We settled, and the assembly about 2 months, maybe about a month ago, Mr. Weddleton, we drew from fund balance for settlement. We did both of the anticipated fire, and then we had some settlement with APD.
And that's that one with the fellow who was an older Korean
That's the
heritage.
one.
Okay.
That's correct.
So that's taken care of, is
That
it?
is correct.
Anything else, John?
No, thank you.
Suzanne, ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two questions. One, Lance, do you have an updated fund balance projection?
I don't. I don't have a different one.
Okay, thanks. And second question, the budget transfers, that's for SAP, that seems to fall into the category of what's working. And I don't know if, Mr. Harris, you're going to include this in your SAP progress report, but I would like to hear more about, what is working, because it seems like that's an example of an efficiency and probably a cost savings maybe associated with SAP. And I don't know that we've heard about much of this. Thank you.
Pete, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and maybe this might be a question I should have asked at a previous meeting, but when ML&P is sold, does SAP go with it? In other words, is Jugat Electric stuck with SAP?
Lock, stock, and barrel. The whole thing is.
Should have been listed as a
Tack it on,
liability.
Whatever that ends up being.
If they don't know that, that could be a point to break this.
It could be a deal breaker.
We know Pete, when asked about closing costs in the BRU, you should ask closing costs in SAP. They're both big pits.
Yeah.
Well, we asked them a couple times.
Thank you, Pete. Chris?
Yeah, thanks. I don't know if there's an actual time or place. Maybe it's a Lance question for you, which would be number 4. But I read in the Dispatch or the Daily News now again that they went through the bonds and a little brief description, and then they said one of the bonds was intending to pay for maintenance outside of the tax cap. And I have not heard anything about this part of the proposal. Can you help me understand what that means and what we're going to be telling the public?
Oh, sure. So it's not outside the tax cap, but when we have, typically in parks and roads or any bond project, it could include an O&M component, which basically if we have a new trail that we're going to build, a new facility that we're going to construct, a road that we're going to widen, that increases the operation and maintenance costs to the departments of the municipality. So we ask the voters to add a O&M increment, which basically increases the tax cap to accommodate that operation and maintenance. And it's reflected in the bond. So absolutely, if they vote for the projects and the projects require additional operation and maintenance above what's there, then that's on. If it's a replacement, typically replacements do not increase the O&M because you're paying for the operation and maintenance of a trail, and unless you're widening it or making it longer, the maintenance of that could go down, but typically you're not adding more on. But I'll take a look at the article.
Yeah, so it's standard procedures on here. It's
Standard
not
procedure.
Some way
Right.
we're trying to work something.
And
Arguably.
But you'll never get the public to believe that.
We wouldn't do that.
Guarantee you that.
Yeah, okay. And, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to continue, Mr. Harris?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to, mention that we went ahead and closed the transaction for the certificates of participation, so the money has been deposited as of yesterday into the Hanford Police Fire Retirement System. $58 million. We received a total interest rate cost on that of 3.5%. Very low rate.
Speaking of
Go ahead,
that,
Chris.
I asked a question the other day at the meeting regarding the increased budget for the management of the Police and Fire Trust. It was a pretty substantial increase year over year. I did receive a call back from the person in charge, and after that conversation, I was left with the sense that there's a little sandbagging going on. And maybe not by intent, but I asked the question, what are we doing that's increasing the cost of training by almost $20,000 in this year? And the simple answer was, well, we just have more people to train. And the training is relative to fiduciary management. But if we're only sending 2 or 3 people to a training, why in the world is it costing $20,000 more? What kind of training is this? It's a semester in college? And so they offered that I could come down and look at their books, and it's probably never going to happen. I would just like from the administration, in particular with this fund that we just now know we transferred tons of millions of dollars, that we get clear information on their line item budgets when they're making big increases. Thank you.
Mr. Chadwick may be able to help, and I'll come to you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Chadwick?
I don't know if I have an answer. I know I don't have an answer, but I think we have to keep I think what you're talking about is the police and fire retiree medical.
Right.
trust.
Mhm.
And that's different than what they're talking about.
Okay.
Right, totally. That was my point.
Harris? You-
That was my
Okay.
point. My point, just to answer that.
Lance?
Well, I had an email into Mr. Bretz to find out if he could get a reply. I'm glad that he called you, but I'm interested to learn a little bit more about his response. So I'll reach out to him as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I apologize if I had made someone seem like a liar. It just seems like there wasn't clear information and I couldn't grasp it from the information that was presented first on the budget proposal in the agenda that we approved and after the conversation. And so maybe it's because I'm rudimentary in my understanding of financials and they need to communicate in such a way that, not so smart people understand. But I'm hopeful that we can get there with that information. Thank you.
Mr. Harris, sir.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Constant, just, please, if anybody, if I'm saying something incorrect here, please just step in. But my understanding is that the position that Mr. Bretz has was funded as part of a settlement, and he reports to that board that he works for. So when, so there's that board is looking at what he's spending the money on that they've allocated on their budget, what their earnings are, and so forth. But we certainly, Lance mentioned, will follow up and try to get, concrete answers for you.
Yes, Mike?
And just so you know, that is proposed as audit of use of private care medical fund every 2 years. And now we are on our next year's audit, 2010.
Yeah, and I will say it again clearly. I'm not accusing anyone of anything untoward. I just can't understand what's going on and trying to see what we're paying for this $20,000 increase. That's a 20% increase in their budget over last year. I'm just trying to understand.
Okay. Okay, anything else on this section dealing with city finances?
Squeeze that in.
Go ahead.
Okay, so Dan Moore, City Treasurer. So just to focus on the revenues for 2017, we are sort of connected with SAP. We're at a bit of a disadvantage. We actually expected we would be because of the go live, and there's training configuration issues, and essentially what's happened is we've fallen behind in revenue postings. We were about a month behind. It's getting less. We have several people working extra. So because of that, when we look at the system, we don't get the full accurate picture. Like, if we compared what 11 months of data were this year versus 11 months of data last year, they're pretty different. We're definitely behind. But the good news is for Treasury, about 85% of all revenues are directly connected to Treasury, and we already have subsystems that tell us the information. So property taxes, room tax, alcohol, not alcohol, tobacco, rental vehicle. So we already have our own direct knowledge of what these revenues are. So everything is, the big revenue sources are staying stable with one exception. It's the one I've said in the past that could have some volatility, and that is the investment income. And so during the month of September, there was a significant drop in the market, and because of that, there were some investment losses that were actually realized losses. So they're not paper, they were stuck with these losses. That's part of the market adjustment as the rates go higher. And the effect of that was about $1.4 million. So it was significant. In the past, the last couple months, I've been able to project somewhere around $3.5 million positive revenue variance, plus or minus. But in that range, I'm staying fairly tight. With the $1.4 million hit on investment revenue, we're down to, and there's also a decline in auto registration tax. We're down to about $2.2 million of positive revenue variance for 2017. That's our best, fullest, sort of highest expectation. There is the chance with tobacco tax, as we've seen in past years, that depending on the timing of the purchasing by the distributors, that could end up either helping us or hurting us at the end of the year. If it were to hurt us in the worst way, it would be another $750,000 down. But I think somewhere in that $2 million range, plus or minus, is about where we should end up the year. And the municipal assistance was the biggest overall single positive variance of $3.3 million this year. But overall, departments are budgeted quite well in terms of their revenues, very accurate, and it's really right now we're just getting caught up on the system. Once we're caught up, things will be fine. And our revenue analysts very very, very capable person. He's able to piece things together from PeopleSoft, from what he can see in SAP, from what he can see within Treasury, and he's done a lot to just paint the picture in as accurate a way as possible. So I have high confidence that we will be in that $2 million range plus or minus by the end of the year.
Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we continue to see an increase in the marijuana revenue going up as we get further.
Yeah, September and October, it does continue to grow, which is good. So September and October is extra strong with PFD. We still, compared to the budget, because that's what we're comparing to, we still expect to be around $1.5 million. But that's good because of that growth trend, it's gotten stronger and stronger. There is going to be an opportunity if the administration and the assembly choose to actually increase that rate for marijuana effective July 1 of next year, and that's something for you all to consider at some future date. But right now, under the original current rate, it's pretty much been on target with what we projected, and that's good. There's no big surprises there.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got John, and then Fred, and then Susan? Suzanne?
I had a follow-up.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr.
We'll take your
Chair.
follow-up.
And just real quick, you may have said this, but what is the rate then that we currently tax marijuana?
I believe it's
5%, ma'am.
5%?
And it can go up 2%, maximum 2% every 2 years. Yeah, so,
By action of the assembly.
yes, correct.
John?
So what's the process that you, we actually lose real money on our investments? So you had to cash out some, were we required to, or we needed the money? What was-
Yeah, we what the city does in its cash flow investments is we outsource the management of that money, and with that you get actively traded securities. So we leave it literally at the discretion, the formal discretion of the money managers, and PNC is the one that does sort of the intermediate. BlackRock does the longer term, and it's at their discretion as to how they want to reposition to sort of set ourselves well for the future. They have a longer term view. So in the short term, we're going to end up realizing losses, but those will position us better down the road. It's a timing issue, but they are realized, so they're not going to go away.
I gotcha, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, Fred?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the end of this meeting, I'd like you to close the meeting and turn off the recorder. Then I have something a comment that will help you guys on the merger.
Okay. Well, okay, we can. Mr. Harris will leave the room before we discuss anything relating to the merger. Yeah?
Yeah, so, I don't know, again, this might come under number 7, maybe I should wait, but I want to discuss re-election.
Okay.
And I was
Okay, that's all we've got then, thank you. Dan, one question. We had a growing facility that was hit by burglary. $150,000 product was lost. So is your projection going to realize we're not going to get money from that money? That product is
We
gone?
don't tax their inventory, we tax their sales, so
Okay.
it's only for.
But eventually they won't be able to sell that because.
Yeah, it could hurt their capacity for volume of sales, that's true.
But the other store.
John?
I got it. They don't pay an inventory tax?
To the state.
They do, well, yeah, on the marijuana product itself, they do. The quantity is what they pay the state. They pay us based on the sales of the product.
But I pay an inventory
And-
tax in
but
my
in the
business.
answer to that, there is for the equipment and their retail space, the value of that is taxable. But you're saying the actual inventory itself?
I pay on mine, why don't they pay on theirs?
Used to toys.
Yeah,
Dangerous comic book.
I guess.
You call it personal
I
property.
think you're right. Just with
Consumable.
cigarettes like in a convenience store, yeah, I think you're right. So
Just
it's a good
smelled
point.
unfairness.
I'll check on that. It's going to be 0.015 times $150,000, so
Okay.
whatever that number is. But, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Moore, appreciate it.
Mr. Trainer,
We're-
just a
yes,
quick
sir.
follow-on to that. There was also a marijuana retail store that was robbed in the last month. And so we're seeing kind of maybe the leading edge of the conversation we had at the
The control, the
Community
economic,
Development
yes, that
Committee
one.
about figuring out a way to work with the state to redact security plans, because we actually publish, and the state actually.
The state actually publishes, and we do, publishes the diagram on where all the cameras are,
And all
the
of
area they
systems
cover, And it's like, why don't you just give them the combination of safe while you're
Right.
doing it?
And so this is definitely becoming a very tangible cash issue at $150,000 worth of profit.
Yeah.
Probably still get robbed less often than liquor stores though.
But not at that volume.
Okay,
I've never heard of liquor store get robbed.
Al Dominguez not here from the Budget Advisory Commission. So SAP progress. Mr. Harris, sir.
Thank you. As I was up late last night thinking, what can I tell you? We are facing a number of challenges with the implementation with the continued development of the SAP program. And let me start with just some numbers to start off with. Right now, we're running at about 153, 155 defects. Last week, we closed 37 defects and opened 35 more. That's to be expected because as we try to do new things, we realized that something didn't work the way we thought it was going to work or we needed to work. And so right now, we're at about steady state. We've had about 150-ish so defects throughout the entire system, covering payroll, purchasing, HR, FILO for the last few weeks. That's a little bit of good news, but I think it's really kind of reflects this larger piece about the growing pains of understanding a new system that we're still in the process of developing. And I think that's the way to put it. And one of the comments at Tuesday's assembly meeting was, it's Tuesday, it's an assembly meeting, so you'll be seeing something about SAP. And I think that's a fair comment. That is a fair comment. What we are proposing for the first quarter is we're going to look to keep, and what we did Tuesday night, just kind of a recap here, was to approve change authority for a contract we had with Peloton. And the reason we needed that was because we thought that by 6 weeks ago, we'd be done. We had a system we were told was going to be, this will get it done. Yeah, that's not the case. So Peloton, we needed Peloton to stay on longer. We will need them to stay on at least through the end of March. We won't be coming back for additional money. We think we have the money within our budget for that and for the other consultants. And that is essential work that we need done so that we can continue to move the development piece of this software system so that we can use it essentially to get us to essential functionality. What happens after the end of March? I'm hoping you won't ask me that question because I don't have an answer today. I can't tell you that we will be in steady state operation at the end of March. And in some ways, that's a reflection of the fact that as a municipality, we have a fairly efficient, lean operation. We don't have lots of extra people hanging around with time on their hands. They have a job to do with a system that if it were working properly, they'd have enough resources to do the job. Now they're doing their job. They're trying to complete development of a program that doesn't work. And now they're also trying to fix the problems of the program that doesn't work. So as I get through and we talk about these various parts and pieces, just sort of keep that in mind, that right now the folks we have in the municipality are working long hours, in some cases like payroll, for example, many long hours, to try to make sure that we have a system that's getting the work of the municipality done. So,
We have a few questions for you.
Yes,
Mr.
please.
Harris. I have one question before I turn over to him. Is the system learning? I mean, when we correct a
Is it
problem,
Skynet?
Is it alive?
once you fix a problem, it should not
Is it learning?
reappear itself. Is it learning? Is it
It's a much more expensive
learning from the modifications we made not to make that same mistake again?
yes, and as you know, there's certainly a learning curve, and we're on the low end of the learning curve still. I think we have a fair number of people who are both learning the system and are learning how to change their business. I mean, what I comment earlier about schedules, for example. In the old system, if somebody needed to move their schedule from 7 o'clock to 7:30 for some business need, that was fairly easy to accommodate. Not so in SAP. It doesn't have that sort of flexibility that we used to experience with PeopleSoft, and that was fairly easy to accommodate. One thing, though, that I think is worth noting is that we're in production. We're using this system right now. So one of the unintended consequences of fixing the problem over there is that by fixing that problem, I made a problem over there that I wasn't anticipating. And typically, the way that's addressed is that you get all those parts and pieces done, and we did that during our testing phases. Then you put it all together, you mash it all together, and you start testing it end to end. So we're doing that end-to-end testing in real time, if you will, so that we have a clear understanding of how these things work. If we were doing it when this was sort of like a tabletop exercise, and we found we made that change and it didn't affect something over here, then people's paychecks don't get interrupted, for example, or something doesn't work that was working and now it's not. So we're running into that, which is why we're still at about 150 defects. I expect that'll continue, and as I said before, when we get to some new activity, let's say the year-end close, we should expect to see a spike in new defects because we're going to find things that don't work. So yes, we're both learning as employees and as part of the system, and the software, when we fix things, it's fixing the things we were hoping to have fixed, and at the same time we want to make sure we didn't break something else.
Mr. Dunbar, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. So I'm listening to what you're saying about the schedules, and I want to drill down a little bit more about how it actually works in the real world. And we on the assembly, we don't clock in and clock out. We don't have set hours. We just get a minimal flat fee, right?
Doesn't mean $15 an hour either, by the way.
No,
So.
but regardless, it's an honor to serve. So the can employee, let's say an employee is delayed by snowfall, for example, or whatever it is, delayed by road conditions, they arrive 15 minutes late. Can they then add 15 minutes at the end of the day to make that up? Do they punch in and punch out like they used to? And why can't they, shorten their meal a little bit, or leave 15 minutes early? Like if they don't have that kind of flexibility, that to me, that strikes me as a really inefficient way to do management if we're not giving that basic flexibility to managers for their own employees.
I have an answer for you, but I'll let Mr. Harris give you the real answer.
Okay, well, I'll try, and then if I make any mistakes, please somebody else pop in and correct. So the system is set up with a schedule in mind. So if somebody is late 15 minutes, they were supposed to work 7 to 4. Instead, they worked 7:15 to 4:15. The system is configured right now, looks at that 15 minutes from 4 to 4:15 and says, you must be paid overtime for that. Okay? So they didn't work their schedule, even though they were late because it was a snowy day. We don't want them to rush. We don't want them to get into trouble. And these are the employees of our 9 unions who have collective bargaining agreements for which work rules and work expectations are fairly clearly defined. So, I'm salaried, so if I show up earlier, if I'm trying to think about what I'm going to say today and it's late at night, I get paid the same. But for our hourly employees who are covered by collective bargaining agreements, they have fairly defined work rules, and to the extent we can. And that's part of the complexity. So, as I talk about pay corrections, somebody sends in a pay correction. It could take anywhere from 2 to 4 hours to do a pay correction for a particular week, because we need to start with what their schedule was, what they actually worked. Under their collective bargaining agreement, were they working with a hot stick for 4 hours? Because that's a different pay rate. And was that from 8 a.m. to noon, or was it, so like the level of complexity that we're sort of facing with our system is fairly significant. And those of you that have been in a work environment where you've had collective bargaining agreements that sort of govern how people get paid will know what that's. It's complex. It's 2 to 4 hours per pay correction.
Are they? How do most of these employees actually clock in and clock out? And if there is a problem from going from 7 to 7:15, then 4 to 4:15, is there a problem going from 8 to 8:01? Do they have to be waiting and sort of like drop it on the exact second? How does it do that?
We have rounding, so in 15-minute blocks around the clock. So 7 minutes after the hour, 7 minutes before, roughly. If they clock in any of that time, it just pushes it automatically to the rounded number.
Okay, that's still a really precise sort of time frame.
Yes.
And so if we need someone to work for 10 extra minutes to, I don't know, maybe they've got a customer in front of them or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying now that person's gonna be pushed into overtime?
In accordance with their collective
10.
bargaining agreement.
Okay, and,
And please, if I misstated that.
So it depends.
Of
Because not
course-
every bargaining
of course
unit, we
it
treat it that way.
Yeah.
Basically, Mr. Harris is correct. If you clock in, 3 minutes before, 3 minutes after, it's gonna snap your time on to 8 o'clock. That's
So-
that's what time shows up on your time card.
When you badge in.
So if an employee, through things that we all understand, shows up 15 minutes late, are you telling managers basically they can't work that extra 15 minutes at the end because then they're in overtime? They just need to eat those 15 minutes they lost.
So, no, because if it's a snow event, we can, as a manager, you still have the ability to go into SAP and manage their time separately. They could come to you and say, I want to work a half hour through my lunch, or I want to stay 15 minutes longer. But it requires a supervisor to actually make those adjustments. The employee cannot do them. The system automatically logs in their regular time. If there's an adjustment to that time, it requires a supervisor to do that. And if there's a lot of it, then that's a lot of supervisors' time
Right.
to actually make those adjustments. So the system allows us to do it, it's just not very simple.
It sounds a lot like the nightmare of billable hours. It's kind of getting flashbacks to being in a firm, managing to bill every 6 minutes. And it's one of the main reasons, God bless Eric for being able to keep doing it. But it's one of the main reasons I sort of pieced out of that world, because that kind of micromanagement is stressful and annoying, and
You don't like it, huh?
Yeah, I don't like it, and I imagine that that's causing quite a lot of friction.
I would also add, that there's a lot of complexities to the system. There's also change. It's also change for people, how they manage, how supervisors manage their people, how people manage their time, and how we manage, the work. So it's a combination of both directions. So,
I got one last person to ask a question, and that'll be Chris. But before you comment, I wanted to say one thing. Remember when Zig was standing here, and Zig was telling us all about this SAP? Remember what he said? This is a precise system. It does not allow you flexibility. He said it was a German system, no offense, but it was very precise. He said versus PeopleSoft was kind of like, we can swap that around. With this one, what we're seeing now is what Zig was telling us was going to happen. It is so precise, it's inflexible.
We should have got the looser American version.
Italians.
Italians even better.
Yeah.
Mr. Constant?
That needs to be on your list.
So it seems to me
Right
like
over there.
there's one really big problem that I hope there's a plan to fix in the short term. So the calendar year ends here in 8 days, and then 30 days later, we owe tax documents to all of these workers. And we have, from all the reports I've heard, have various levels of over and underpay. And we continue this process of just getting them a check because they gotta be paid without kind of reckoning fully with the actual cost and earned income and expenses relative to that individual. And so what's the plan to ensure that when we send out W-2s, they're accurate and we aren't forcing people into additional tax brackets because we've overpaid them by $20,000 in the process of keeping ourselves moving?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Constant, I'll take a stab at that, and then again, if I'm incorrect, please someone step in. So, we'll send out W-2s by the end of January as required, and they will reflect what we have shown in our records, both for PeopleSoft and SAP, what we paid people through the year. Where we've had overpayments for folks who don't want to get pushed into another tax bracket, we've been having a series of discussions about how we would communicate with them, and that may have already happened, to say, look, we haven't got it all sorted out, but if you think you've been overpaid, we want to make sure we're listening to you and we've got some plan in place. I'm not a lawyer, but there are people who are lawyers who tell me that the complexities that we face with our collective bargaining agreements add some wrinkles to that, to whatever solutions we can help deliver to our employees. And so I think there's some discussion back and forth about how we can find an appropriate, meaningful solution to that question. I don't have an answer for you right now on whether or not that had been determined.
So just really, what's your confidence level that we're not gonna see a bunch of people coming at us saying, hey, I got screwed royally, I paid $10,000 in taxes?
They're all gonna be downtown people.
Yeah. And these are all our folks who are in these units that are in these kind of very flexible schedules.
Well, the hard part you asked me about is what's my confidence level.
Yeah.
And one of the things when we launched, when we went into this system we were used to seeing a series of reports, for example, on payroll and so forth, and we don't have those yet developed for this new software system. Those reports help us with confidence that we both are able to look at the numbers coming out of the system, we're able to validate those numbers, and we have confidence that the numbers are right. I do think we have a means of identifying that fairly small universe of people who were paid overage. And I understand that we're having conversations with those employees to make sure that if they need us to figure out some way to get them back underneath their tax cap numbers, certainly with changes to the tax system that are proposed and will be signed into law early next month, people would be incentivized to move money income from this year to next, certainly. And so, our goal is to try to work to make sure that we have not put our employees in a burdensome tax situation that they had not planned on for the year. That was our goal. And hopefully it's a fairly small universe of people out of the total number of employees we have, but our goal and our commitment is to do as you suggested. We don't want people to be hit with a tax burden they haven't anticipated.
I've got 3 other people, but before I get to them, I got a question for you, Lance, that was written to me by one of our people. She wants to know in October books aren't going to be closed until January. Is finance going to be ready for the BDO audit?
I don't know the answer to that question. It will be ready.
We
for
do need to
BDO.
know that answer because they built in the BDO audit cost escalator if SAP doesn't give them the information they need.
Right, so, Mr. Chairman, I can answer that question. So, the answer is in our preliminary discussions with BDO, we've explained to them that we're bringing on SAP and that we expect some delays. So, we've already had discussions with BDO about pushing back the day they actually show up in our office. Remember that they have 2 systems they'll be auditing next year. 9 months of PeopleSoft, which they can launch, they can start working on that when they get here. But then the SAP portions. So, we're hopeful that we'll see our audit done by the end of June, as we
Sure.
normally do. I think our deadline is the end of June. In the last couple of years, we've been later than that because the state has not had their information on PERS audited files for us. But that's certainly our goal. Again, I go back to the question I was asked about confidence. Am I confident in that? No, and my goal is to be more confident in that by the end of March. But right now,
Anything else? Okay.
But right now, we have asked BDO we told them we're in the implementation, and they did tack on an adder to our contract of 5% to sort of help basically pay for them.
They wanted
coming up to
10.
speed.
They reduced down to 5%.
Which completely failed.
Okay, Tim?
Yeah. Is PeopleSoft an old enough software package that it's on version 2, 3, 4, whatever it is, in terms of the software? And what happens when the next version shows up in terms of all these little corrections that we've done here, there, and everywhere?
We're required to buy
Implementing
the-
that, are we going to be back at square one? Certainly not square one, but are we?
So,
Mr. Harris?
Just elaborate a
so,
little bit.
so Mr. Steele, are you asking about PeopleSoft or SAP?
Well, both in terms of software.
Right. I don't believe we anticipate doing a lot of upgrades to PeopleSoft from this point forward. We're going to warehouse the data we have, which our existing software program should be adequate to allow us to do that. That's not a software as a service type of product where we're going out and buying it
Okay.
online. And as you know, for many years, on the question of whether or not to upgrade PeopleSoft over time, folks decided to just let the system lie and then transition to SAP.
With SAP, we got what we got. If they come up with a new bells and whistles, we'll make a decision at that point. But
Right, I
we
think the
wanna
new
go
bells
with
and
that.
whistles comes out in about 5 years. It'll be S4 on in the cloud.
Hopefully, we'll be squared away. by
We're
then.
required to buy the update whenever they come out. As part of the agreement we did when we picked up SAP was to whenever they have a new version, we have to automatically go to that one. It's built into their program.
Right.
Forrest,
Something wrong with
you're
that.
next, sir. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, what was I going to say? Oh, Alden, you're in the room. You know, I know you are no longer the SAP guru, but is there anything you'd like to say to us about it?
I think Mr. Harris has been very, I mean, I do certainly hear things. I think he has his pulse definitely on it a lot greater than I do. I would just kind of mention, as he talked about, we did have to give away UAT and performance testing, if you remember, in order to be able to meet the October deadline that we had. So a lot of what the employees are experiencing right now is that kind of that on-the-go user acceptance testing, and in many cases, they're testing things and/or finding the things that, this is a 6-year project, so a lot of different consultants, a lot of different green staff involved, and when we actually put the system into production, some of the things that maybe we thought we wanted, they wanted it a little bit different. So the way of being able to fix those things is creating defects and working through them. So through the availability of the existing funds that were mentioned, I think we've been able to keep the consultants to ultimately provide the exact system that the municipality is looking for and using, and I think that's a positive thing. I know we're looking for positives here. And then the other aspect that I want to keep hitting is that, you know, as Mr. Harris mentioned, we, as we've talked about all the way through, have a very lean staff. So when you're trying to do your regular job and test out a new system and get training and learn about it and so forth, it takes longer to be able to do all those tasks. You know, in a perfect world, we would have a deeper bench to be able to pull from to be able to do that. Reports were one area that got deferred, if you remember, to the very end, and I think that's some of the defects that you're seeing right now are in the report areas. So people are able to get in there and start working on them, which create defects. So ultimately, I think they need those reports to be able to do their jobs, and I think that's what you're seeing people working on now, and probably through the end of March to be able to accomplish that. Those are just the aspects that I've been hearing, but you know, ultimately, our people are still working their tails off to be able to do their regular jobs and bring this system, which had 19 modules, and online. And I think that and we talked about that several times, is a challenge. And it wasn't just that we hit October 2nd and everything was going to be rosy. We talked about the fact that the municipal staffs were going to be having to work very diligently for some extended period of time to be able to get there. And the good part is they've been doing that fantastically, but those have provided challenges which you've been talking about as well.
Great, thank you. No.
Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Harris brought up an interesting concept when he started talking about confidence. It reminded me of the old days of when they used to do the NASA launches live on TV, and they'd be going around and, you know, confidence is high, confidence is high. Well, you know, if you're in a rocket, that's what you want to hear. And so, evidently, if they would have gone around the SAP room, confidence wouldn't have been so high the day before we went to launch. But my question is, what percentage of our problems with SAP are outside of payroll? I mean, is payroll 80%, 90% of the problems we're having, or?
Thank you, through the chair, Mr. Peterson. Payroll is a big number. We have right now a really large number of pay corrections that we get. And we're getting a fair number of pay corrections every week to sort of the point of, are we missing somebody's pay by $200 or $500 versus $50? I got my fingers crossed that we're all in the $25, $50 range. That we're not so far off in terms of somebody's payroll that they're going to have trouble paying their mortgage. For those folks, we are doing off-cycle paychecks. But we are also experiencing problems in purchasing. You know, and those are questions that come up as a result of, let's say, right now, for example, we're at about 3,800 purchase orders for the year. The way the system's configured right now, at the end of the year, about 1,800 of those, 1,400 of those will just turn off because it's the end of 17, when in fact we wouldn't necessarily want them to turn off. So for a department that produces about 300 purchase orders a month, there'll be a little extra work for them to bring those 1,700, 1,800 purchase orders that we still want to maintain, keep going into 18. But we'll want to make sure they work. That we think that's manageable, that's doable. The other departments are HCM, which is, has our ER department, benefits, and they're right now looking for reports to be able to manage their business. One of the sort of situations that arose when we told the state we were going to SAP, they said, well, we want you to be able to give us the information first, when you go into production. Well, okay, we did, and then it turns out they weren't ready. So there's a little back and forth with the state about, we're doing exactly what you told us to, and we're still meeting our deadlines in terms of when the deposits go forward and so forth, but there's some back and forth there. There's some work for people that we wouldn't normally expect. For FILO, month-end close issues, we've been working on closing out the month of October for about 2.5, 3 weeks. We first did the September closeout, and that was based on PeopleSoft data that had migrated into SAP. That got done somewhere in mid to late October. But we've run across, and this is part of the learning curve, run across a number of things in how we have presented data within SAP for the month-end close that we're working through. Right now, I think it's one of the enterprises, how they presented their data. I got my fingers crossed, and my confidence is fairly high that once we get October's month-end close done, November will follow very quickly shortly afterwards. And so we may find a way to kind of get back up on step with respect to the month-end close. That'll take us into the year-end close, which happens February, March, roughly. And I'm expecting we'll see more defects because this will be the first time we've done a year-end close with this new software system. Again, though, the payroll problem is it's a significant problem, and I've asked my staff, I've challenged people across the municipality and central payroll as well as within some of the other groups and the executive leadership about we need innovative solutions to fix the problem. We don't have the number of people to handle the number of pay corrections that we're seeing given that every one of them takes 2 to 4 hours.
Any other questions from some of your members? We're out of time. This meeting's over with. Thanks for being here.